You can sit there. I'm there with my stuff is there and I'm like, come and join us. How are you doing? First of all, yeah, he is my bestie. He wasn't right with us. I didn't go into.
Just send us a picture.
I'm gonna.
Is that what the problem was?
I think certain things just work better. You guys don't need phone mics, like here for all 5 years. Are you talking to yours?
He's coming up. How's everything? Yeah. I told Heather, you guys are ready to set the quarterly meeting that they have for the school. Yeah, if we could just set that meeting up and whatever the next meeting they have, like whatever you guys need to submit, do that now. So I know you guys are having a fun thing, but I don't want to miss it again. I definitely don't want to try to squeeze it into a 2 weeks span.
Okay.
Yeah. I started copying the composition.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ScaleUp. My name is Jennifer. I'm the community manager with StartUp Vegas. So excited to have you guys here tonight. And as you may or may not know, ScaleUp is a great opportunity to learn from folks who understand how to grow and scale your business. Tonight's topic, we are talking about metrics. Who's excited? I mean, that was actually pretty good. But we have both John Emmons and John Laurie from Project Wilbur, and I'm going to hand the mics over to them. So who's
Sweet. Is it on?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Awesome. Hey everybody, how you doing? Good. Okay, you can do better than that. Hey, there you go. I gotta get it. All right, well, awesome. So metrics, they matter. They are really why you get investment, or why your company succeeds, or why your company fails. Right? I'm John. I started Project Wilbur years ago. We work with a bunch of different startups, doing a bunch of different things. We also work with Fortune 500 companies, helping them scale and doing interesting things around whether they need software development, consulting, and also marketing. So we play in all those spaces. I've done 10 startups. I've exited 5. 5 were just strictly learning experiences. So I've kind of been through most things, which is fun. And this is John, another John. There's 2 of us.
Yeah, you're not allowed to join Project Wilbur until you have the name John.
That's true. That is a fact.
So just a little about me. In the past 15 years, I've worked with 350 companies from startup to enterprise level, everything from operations to analytics, strategy, market analysis, the whole nine. Was in academia for 5 years, teaching strategy and entrepreneurship at Baylor University. Then I got my head right and joined the private sector again, and ended up meeting John a few years ago through a mutual friend. And he said, "You also have a good name, so you should work with us." So I did. And we're going to talk to you about metrics tonight. I think I'm the sort of the metrics guy at Project Wilbur. And I know it doesn't sound sexy, but we're going to try and make it a little fun for you guys today.
We covered this already, but this is a bit about Wilbur. All right. So, gut feelings. Everybody's like, I think everybody wants this, right? Or I'm going to build this, and then someone's going to use it. And don't do that. That's bad. You want to make sure that you're using data to make most of the decisions that you're doing, especially when you're taking money from other people, because you want to make sure you're fiduciary responsible, right? So data leads to mitigating that risk, which is really the most important. Here's an example of how that didn't work.
So how many of you have heard of Quibi? A few of you? You were in rare company because they were only around about 6 months. So they raised 1.75 billion, founded in 2018. They had a concept that they were going to do short form videos. And this is one of those fantastic ideas that, I think it's amazing. And so I think everybody's going to think it's amazing, and we're just going to barrel ahead. And somehow they managed to raise almost 1.8 billion, which is an enormous sum to do this. And they were building a platform, and the problem is they didn't do any research. No market research, no customer validation. They just kind of plowed ahead with, everybody's going to love this, right? And what ended up happening, after they started up, they didn't even track things such as active user session length or content completion rates, which if you're doing videos, short form, long form, whatever, or anybody's coming to your site and using your stuff, you want to track all those things. It took them all of 6 months to go out of business. So I'm sure heartbreaking for the founders, more heartbreaking for the investors that put up 1.75 billion. So cautionary tale. But this is not uncommon, right? This happens all the time. There's, hundreds of companies you've never heard of that have done the same thing.
Like, we could just make this a listing presentation. We would just list everything that raised money and failed. We're not going to do that though. So this is you still.
Oh, it's me. So we're going to talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. These are quantifiable metrics. In other words, this is data, but it's the most important data that you've got. So we will talk about how do you know what important data is, because that's a question we're going to get. But this is how you evaluate what you're doing and whether your business objectives are correct, whether what you're doing matches up with your business objectives. And these things end up guiding your company. So where we get off the rails a bit is we've got objectives and we're not tracking KPIs, or we've got objectives and we're tracking the wrong KPIs, or we don't have objectives and we're just gathering data. And that's a big distinction. I know that you guys have probably gotten to the point where you've heard a lot of stories of there's a startup and our business is we collect data, right? And we're going to sell that data. Well, KPIs are sort of like that. Companies like that collect the data to sell the data. Somebody has to care about the data that you collected. If nobody cares about it, then that data is worth zero, right? If somebody cares about it, it's worth a lot. And, same things work with KPIs within your company. You can collect a lot of data, not all of it's meaningful to your business objectives, right? So you've got to collect the stuff and through different categories, which we're going to go through, that make sense to track for your business to ensure hopefully success. So all KPIs are metrics, but not all metrics are KPIs. Metrics are just data points, data. KPIs are the most important data points, the most important metrics. And this is the thing that's going to guide you. So long story short, if you screw this part up or don't do it, your chance of success is probably pretty low with your startup. Is it still me?
No, I don't know. So, it is you, yeah. So basically, aspirational goal, that's like a mission statement, right? You're like, this is our vision statement. This is who I want to be. This is what we want to do, right? This is your goal. How are you going to get there? You have to figure out the path to do that. So when you do that, and this is actually like, I'm going to take this from an investor's point of view. When you're raising capital, your must-wins, those are your KPIs that, I mean, they're KPIs, but they're also the KPIs that usually release tranches of capital, or when you should raise, right? They're valuation points, where you can point to the company going up in value, right? So that's a really important timeline that you have to put together, because if you're missing those, it's really hard to justify any sort of increase in value. Did we get that? All right, sweet. All right, so that brings us to this. So investors, we tear companies apart for like a living, right? So we get paid to do that. So when you pitch us, we're like, and then we'll go and we'll crank through all the data that you give us, right? Which leads to basically, what is the value of whatever you're putting together? When we try to realize the value of what we put together, it comes into different stages have different valuation points. Like everything Series A and later, it's all monetary, revenue based, right? Pre-seed, seed, it's going to be based on team, problem, solution, traction, different data points that are provable, scalable, and have important measurable attributes to them. And hitting the first year targets goes back to the KPIs and actually executing on the value, the valuation goals that you set for yourself as a company.
Hey, can we go back one slide?
I think so. Yeah, I'm gonna figure this out. There you go.
So that first year targets, that's an important thing. And so when you go to pitch a company and, everybody wants to put on their best face, right? You're going to put together your deck, your investment material, and you're going to say, hey, look, here are my projections. Here's what we're going to do year one. A lot of times those are, for lack of a better term, incredibly aggressive, right? So let's say you get a little money, some seed money, some startup funding, and you can't hit those first year goals. What happens then when you go for more money? Probably not going to get the money, right? So it's a balancing act. Anytime that you set goals, especially that are data specific, they should be aggressive but attainable, right? So you're always trying to play that balance with investors, because what do investors want? Well, I want $1 billion exit, right? A $3 billion exit. I want the unicorn.
Right.
So again, cautionary tale.
The rule of thumb, the backwards math to figure this out is they always want a 10x return on whatever point they invested, right? And if it's the pre-seed, seed, and this isn't what this is about, but like it's a good, like it's a metric, right? They're going to want to capture between 20 and 30% of your company for each raise, right? And when I say they, I mean that's collective. Like that's not just one investor, that's the group. So if you're raising at a pre-seed or seed, and you're raising 300K, then your company should be at $1 million valuation-ish. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. So that's you.
This is a good example. Beyond gut feelings, another KPI failure. Have you ever heard of a Better Place? This was an EV-based startup. So a Better Place had a concept that they weren't going to build cars, they were going to build EV infrastructure and not charging stations. They were going to build an infrastructure around replaceable batteries. So your car wouldn't have a battery that you would have until eventually it died or blew up. It would be a battery that you basically rented and could swap out at different locations, right? So very interesting concept. They raised $850 million. Again, did not do any market research. So immediately when this concept came out, there was a lot of criticisms. Like, how are you going to swap out batteries? How are you going to, batteries are big, they're not small, right? Where are these stations where you can swap out batteries going to be located? How are you going to do this? How are you going to get manufacturers on board? People were very skeptical. And again, this was very much I think this is a really innovative idea, and I don't care what people are saying, and I'm going to plow ahead with this. So $850 million later, without looking at customer interest and customer adoption rates, they went full bore. They didn't track anything. No user signups, no usage rates of battery swap stations, among many other things. By 2013, they were bankrupt, right? Again, that's $850 million gone. Investors are never getting that back. Go ahead, that's me. Okay, so when you're looking at metrics, you really want to start tracking from the beginning, but then what do those numbers mean, right? So we're going to go through what some of the right metrics are for a lot of different categories, but in a general sense, you want to start collecting data. And I know this is tough when you're a startup. Like, how many of you have had startups or have startups now? Raise your hands. Yeah. You know, you're busy when you're a startup. How many of you said, like, look, I don't have time to track data. You know, I've got to just go. Like, I've got 24 hours in a day and I've got 40 hours worth of work to do. I've been there, right? It happens. But the sooner you can start collecting things, the better. And as you start looking back 3, 6, 9, 12 months, assuming you're collecting the right data, this is where you get to the point where you can say, hey, the stuff I'm doing is working, or the stuff I'm doing is not working. I need to make some sort of change. Maybe it's a little change, maybe it's a major pivot. It really just depends. So presently, you know, are you hitting your targets, right? If you're not hitting your targets, there's always a reason. Why, right? What are some of the reasons?
Sometimes when you're in a situation where you're actually missing a lot of your targets, that KPI, that acknowledgement that you made a mistake, is important for an investor. It shows that you learned from it, especially if you overcame it, right? Also, when you're communicating to your investors and doing updates, showing that, like, hey, here's some of the challenges that we're facing is a really big way, strong way, to pull them into a more stronger dialogue with you, bringing in their resources, not just money, because they made money somehow, right, to be able to solve these problems. They're a resource for you. You should use it.
Yeah, so your future part where it says market analysis, SWOT, client needs assessment, like, I hope you've done a preliminary one of those prior to starting, but as you're collecting this data over the first year, you really have to take a hard look at that. And that's going to help you determine, like, do I have the right target market? Like, am I going after the right people? If I am going after the right people, have they accepted my solution? And, you know, if they haven't, why not? Is it too expensive? Is it not accessible enough? Is the messaging not right? Whatever it is, you need to be able to gather assessment tool and then redirect if necessary. Like, the good and the bad thing is data collection is so much easier now than it was 10 or 15 years ago. 15 years ago, really tough, right? To collect data. Now there's a ton of tools and even more data. And that's also the downside is, you know, you can collect a whole bunch of stuff. And how long is it going to take you to filter out right from wrong, what's important, what's not, and then start your analysis? You know, it can be paralysis by analysis, right? It can be really tough stuff. So, you know, you want to get to those things that are most meaningful to your company.
This is my favorite slide. So, revenue growth rate, that determines really whether you're investable or not, right? And what stage you're in. So if you're growing double digit month over month, you're a high growth startup, good for you, kudos. You should go raise money and throw more fuel in the fire. If you're single digit month over month, low single digits, you haven't found product market fit yet, these are just really easy indicators, super easy to figure that out. When you get to profit margin, your net, so again, it matters on who you're pitching to. Family offices, high net worth individuals, all of that, they're going to care about your profit margin, your net, because they want cash flow. They want to see that, okay, we throw more fuel in the fire, we're going to get some return, there's going to be some dividends, that's positive. Also, it allows you to reinvest in your business. You have to know these numbers. When you go into any sort of investor meeting and you don't know these numbers, what happens is they don't invest in you, right? Unless, you know, they think they can help you to figure that out, which means you have to be coachable. It's a whole different pitch. And then why they matter, when you're raising capital and you don't know your numbers, you have not mitigated the trust that you need to have from any investor. Like, you need to make sure that they now believe in you. They're not going to be losing their money, right? They're going to be responsible and actually delivering on what you said you were going to do. especially if you haven't done an exit before, you can't pull from other investors, this is the first investor in. And you have to be able to execute on all those things. And if you don't, and you miss those numbers, and you don't know what you should be paying attention to, like that kills you. This is really about numbers, KPIs, but it's also about the team being able to be knowledgeable about these things. And that leads into these two main numbers, which are like the most important, right? Your customer acquisition cost is the definition of how investable you are and how that fuel is going to grow. And then the lifetime value is what does that money buy, right? So if you buy a customer for $5, they spend $1,000 with you a year, it's like awful numbers, just let's say $500. They're with you for $1,000 a year and they're staying with you for like, I don't know, 3 years. Wow, that looks amazing. The ROI on that is phenomenal, right? Do that. Don't do the whole thing where, well, it costs us $10,000 to get this customer and we're making $1,200 a year. It sounds terrible. Don't do that.
Yeah, if you walk into an investor meeting and you don't have these two numbers, you're probably not going to get another meeting with those investors, right?
Right.
Like that's just the reality. Part of it's the trust issue where, if you go to an investor, they have concerns about risk, right? Somebody's going to give you a stack of cash, they want to make sure that it's the right investment for them. And until you prove otherwise, you are a big risk, right? So two things. One, you've got to have these two. And you'd be surprised at how many people walk into a meeting and can't tell you their CAC, right? Big red flag. The other one is when you don't have this data, it makes you look unorganized and sloppy. And if you can't do the basic things like this, organize some data that people are looking for, it makes them believe that you can't run their company even if they gave you $1.75 billion, right? So there's a huge trust issue there.
Good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're a super early stage startup.
Yeah.
How important is the LTV metric? You should know your CAC, but how important is your lifetime value?
Let's go back early, right? Like you don't know your CAC because you haven't launched yet, right? I think that's true with you, right? If I remember. All right. So you should know what the CAC is for the space. And you should know what the LTV is for the space.
So it's a more competitive metric.
You should be able to say, look, these 6 companies that I think that we're better than, this is what I'm estimating they're spending based on industry knowledge and know-how. And then this is what the average customer stays in the space. You might not know yours, but you should know what the industry is, right? So still know it. Yeah.
Just a follow-up to that. Where can you find information for your competitor, like how much they're spending, or things like that? Is that even possible to get?
Yeah, so it is. There's lots of ways to do that. You can reach out to companies that are no longer viable, like some of the ones that we showed that failed. You can reach out to those founders on LinkedIn. All of founders, every founder, me, anybody in this town, anybody in San Francisco, if you're not selling to them and you're asking for advice, they're going to give you some time because there needs to be more people solving problems. That's just the thing, right? So reach out and talk to people. There's also a lot of studies that are done. YC publishes things all the time about that, so does Techstars. A lot of incubators do. Not saying they're all correct. Some blogs will show you why that's true on the not correct part. But there's lots of places to get data. Crunchbase has some data sets on this. If you know somebody that has access to PitchBook, there's data sets on this. What's that? Yeah, Startup MD has studies on this, yeah. So, yep, the colleges, a lot of colleges have research papers on this. So to answer your question, there's lots of research.
Yes, so I'll just give you a quick story. Like I said before, data now is so ever present that there are a lot of data sources out there. Sometimes, you can't go search, sometimes you can, but most of the time you can't go search and say, hey, what is the financial breakdown of a company like this in industry? Like that doesn't exist, right? So you're gonna have to put your own data sets together from other places and do a little analysis and do something like that. Sometimes that doesn't even exist. I'll tell you this is I did a startup, and this is super low level, way lower level than any of you guys are doing. I decided to start a tanning salon when I was a grad school in New Orleans, and there were two major universities, and there was not a walking distance tanning salon, to them. So I found the perfect spot. The next closest one was Atlantic Beach, which is the #1 tanning salon chain in the country. They got a massive amount of money, and if one of their locations goes under, they just get a new owner to come in, put up the money, so they keep going again, right? So you never get rid of them. So, I said, look, I think we can do this better, cheaper, make more money. I think we can take market share away from them because freshmen can't have cars on campus. So they said, all right, well, let me see some numbers. I didn't have any numbers. How am I going to get those numbers? So I'm thinking, how can I get that? I had friends calling Planet Beach, pretending to be investors, using different phone numbers. They're extremely tight-lipped about what they're going to get out. And I tried everything, and I couldn't figure it out. And one day I was looking at these tanning beds. I noticed there was a little tag on the beds that said, how much wattage was used every time a cycle ran, which was like 15 minutes in a bed. And then I realized that in the state of Louisiana, you can call the energy company, and they will give you the kilowatt hours used by any business over a 12-month period. So what I did is I called and said, hey, I want the kilowatt hours used for this particular Planet Beach per year, and month by month for the year. And then I estimated using the wattage from the tanning bed, like how many cycles or how many tans were done. And then I said, all right, well, I'm estimating that 15% was, lights and AC and running computers, and the other 85% was, tanning cycles. And then, so I said, now I've got my metrics. And then I said, I think we can do X based off of this. And, we were going to show it to an investor, and our accountant was like, well, can I take a look? And as soon as we showed him, he's like, I'll put in like 25K right now. And so that's how I got it. I mean, I struggled for like a month to figure this out, but sometimes it takes getting a little creative like that. And I'm sure my estimates weren't 100% on, but they were enough on that people put money in.
You got a question?
For those people who have launched, how much time worth of data should they have before they start presenting their own versus estimates? So is it like 3 months, 6 months, a year?
So they have to pick goals or KPIs that they're going to achieve, and then make those their milestones. And again, they should look at what the competitive landscape's like. So sometimes it's user data, not money, right? Sometimes it's time on the site. What's the dwell time? How long are they paying attention? Different points. It really depends on what's relevant for the space. Obviously, money is always the #1 relevant metric, right? But sometimes money's not, like Facebook didn't make any money for the first 4 years, 6 years, maybe. I don't know. It was a long period of time. But what they raised money on was the fact that they had all the college students, which is the next generation at that time, right? Which is how Instagram raised capital. It was user-based. They had a $2 billion or $1.3 billion, whatever it was, $1 billion+ acquisition, and they made no money, at all. They hadn't figured out how to monetize it all, but they had the user base. They were growing at a clip that was high double digits month over month, and actually it was I think they were high triple digits month over month for the first 3 months. Something like that is valuable, right? So sometimes data is valuable. So it really depends on what it is. So I guess the bottom line is track as much as you possibly can whenever you're doing a startup, and then you figure out what's working, what's not, and keep iterating until you have 30, 60, 90 days worth of data, and then start figuring out how to monetize it. Because once you have a high growth clip monthly or quarterly, not quarterly, monthly, weekly, those are what you should be focused on in startup. Quarterly is you've got revenue going on, you've already hit the $1 million ARR market point. You had a question?
Well, I think you kind of answered it a little bit, but just to kind of go from what Jen said is, with CAC, it's the sales plus the marketing costs, divided quarter, you could do it for year. How important is it to kind of look at, that trend? Are you getting that down, or is it starting to blow up for some reason? And what is the right interval in being able to report that? A year, month, quarter? Year?
So you want to track it monthly, right? You want to track it per customer, and you want to break it down to like, all right, we're going to start off high, but the goal is to reduce that 30% over the next 90 days, right? Or whatever the metric you choose is, because that's a KPI that an investor will create a tranche for investment. So like each time you have a relevant KPI, like it costs less, which means your margins go up, which means you're more invested, right? So each time that happens, that's a relevant KPI for investment. Valuation goes up. These are important things to keep track of. So get as granular as you can internally. Externally, just be transparent, but make it easy to understand. I've had these conversations, I think I've presented on this one. The simpler you can make things, the easier it is to sell anything. Right? You should be able to convey anything in a sentence. And it should not be a 15-sentence, like, let me explain what we do, and then 30 minutes later, we're all talking about stuff. Like, I still don't know, right? That's usually like the worst scenario. So, simple's better. All right. So, retention rate and market growth. Your retention rate is going to fluctuate a lot when you start. First 12 months, it's always a mess. But each time you capture data and you figure out, you correlate that to whatever the reason was, that's really important. Because then you can point to that, either learn from that, or you can expand upon that, make it better. And then market share growth. So there's a pro and con to this, right? And I say that and I sigh because whenever somebody says to me, or John, and we look at each other, and we're just frustrated, because usually we'll get someone to pitch us, and like, it's a $47 billion industry, and if I just got 1% of that market share, and I'm like, oh God, right? Am I wrong?
It's true.
Every time. We'll text each other during the presentation, get frustrated. So we really like unit economics. Breaking down market share growth is important over time, right? And we don't have it in here, but I'm going to point something out. You might get mad at me, but I'm going to do it anyway. So BlackBerry had huge market share, right? Massive. And then the iPhone came out. And they discounted, like, nobody's going to care about a touch screen. Everybody wants to feel the keys. And they didn't care. They didn't pay attention. And then 3 years later, they had lost their lead. They were not number one anymore. This is pretty quick. Then all of a sudden the Siri thing came out. They're trying to talk to Siri. They're like, nobody's going to want that. 3 more years later, they go bankrupt, right? Not paying attention to your customer and ignoring what they actually want is bad. Once you start losing some market share, you got to pay attention. And once you start capturing market share, don't tell anyone what you're doing.
So one of the ways that you can look at market share growth when you're a startup, I know it's tough, is to come up with preliminary numbers. So the way I do market analysis, TAM Samsung is pretty standard. I don't do my market analysis like that because that's really industry. It doesn't tell you anything about your potential customers. So when I do a market analysis, and this is assuming it's B2C, I actually use the census quite a bit for a given geographic area. And I can, I do a reductive analysis based on attributes that make sense for whatever that product or service is. And, then I say, all right, well, I've got my perfect customer down. This is my target market is X number of people. And then I can say, well, I'm expecting to get a 1 to 3% market share in year 1. And that's my baseline. That's my hypothetical projected baseline. And then as you go through your first year, you can see how many customers you have versus what you originally projected. And, is it past that? Fantastic. Is it not up to that? Okay. Well, let's take a look at some of the other metrics and figure out why not. Why are we lagging? That's how I do is setting the hypothetical baseline and then tracking off of that. Okay. Operational KPIs. This is me? Yeah. Operational KPIs. The engine room of your business. So when you're looking at operations, again, cost per acquisition all acquisition costs, not just marketing. How much did it cost you in total to acquire one customer? And then it goes for every single customer, right? On-time project delivery, very important. John and I have talked about this a lot at Project Wilbur internally, right? So you have to set up your operations and come up with reasonable delivery times. I mean, when you're, and I've been here, when you're a startup, somebody says, how fast can you do it? I can do it in 2 weeks, right? I've blurted that out, I don't know how many times. Is that accurate usually? No, it's not, right? You don't want to let the customer down, right? You don't want to be the person that says, well, realistically, it's going to take me 5 weeks because you're afraid somebody else can say, well, I can do it in 4 weeks, and I'm going to go with them and not you, right? But you've got to go through this process of, step by step. This is where project management software comes in. A lot of it's very inexpensive. You track, each task and each phase in a project, assign it a realistic timeline. Sometimes you're going to mess up. Sometimes you're going to say 2 weeks and it takes 4 weeks. And then you're going to adjust the next time you go through that, right? So there is a learning curve there. But this is where you optimize what you do, because the better you get at efficiency, the faster you can do things. And that means you have more time, right? So we talked about you have 24 hours in a day. If I'm inefficient and it takes me 10 hours to do something, that's not nearly as good as getting rid of the bottlenecks, being efficient, getting the steps down, and being able to do that in 4 hours a day. Well, now I can do 2 projects instead of 1 project, right? So time is money. And that's sort of the way it works. So when you track these things, your goal is to eliminate the stuff that doesn't matter as much and focus on the stuff that does matter to get you from point A to point B, so that you're not burning time, which is money.
So, and just to even get more granular on that, why this matters so much is project management software tells you how long a project takes. And you try to resell that said project to like another customer, right? And the sales guy now knows how long it takes. Because as a startup, you're figuring it out every step of the way, right? So if the onboarding process you think will take a week, and maybe it does, maybe it's a week's worth of hours for your team, but the customer on average takes 4 days to get back to you for each point. There's 6 points. Now it's a month-long project or over a month project. That's not like, that's something you have to communicate as a salesperson and account manager, like, hey, we brought you on, which leads to a better experience for the customer, which extends your LTV, right? Because when they sign up and you miss all of your numbers, you tell them it takes a week and it takes 2 months, but they're not going to renew next year, right? So all of this leads to all the investable things we talked about before.
Yeah, John and I have been through this a number of times. 99% of the delays that we've had delivering to a client have come from the client being late, getting us the information that we need. So when we factor stuff in, it used to be, okay, we're going to do this, and then we need to get this information from client. We'll assign 2 days to that, because clearly they're motivated, they want to do well. 48 hours is probably a lot. They should probably do 24. We'll assign 48 hours. And then 3 days go by and nothing, so we send them an email, right? Hey, really looking forward to seeing whatever it is that we needed. Oh, sure, I'll get it to you by the end of business day. And then that end of business comes around and there's no email. And then you don't want to send another email at 6 p.m., so you wait. And then end of business next day, like, hey, I really need the stuff. And then it doesn't come. And pretty soon it's like, you get an email 2 days later, hey, look, I was traveling, I was in 20 meetings, really super sorry about that. I promise I'll get it to you today. And so maybe that 48 hours turns into 10 days, right? But at the end of the project, the client doesn't remember, I was 10 days late getting you the information you desperately needed to move on to the next step. They just remember you guys were late, right? So now we always factor in extra time for the client to get back to us, since we have our own steps down pretty well.
That is a good point. So sales conversion rate, anybody know what that is? Like what that means? Go for it.
So sales conversion rate is, is being able to get some kind of lead and being able to get them to be from, and that could be anywhere from just getting awareness of your company or your product to the point where they can actually make a sale.
Right, yeah, it's from lead to close, right? So your conversion rate, like let's say you have 100 meetings, And of the 100 meetings, 20 make sense. And then of the 20, 5 close, right? We have 5% sales conversion. So I guess I didn't need the 20 good ones, but like, you want to know that number because it helps you figure out where your time should be spent, right? On the marketing ROI, well, that's the CAC, right? I mean, that truly is like, what is the return on my investment? If I spend $1,000, am I going to make 10 grand or am I going to make 900? Am I doing this wrong, right? Or am I making 0? You get one of those. Yeah. So when you have all these KPIs and you measure them out, what you'll be able to do is grow your business, right? These are just simple building blocks to grow, right? So you just want to make sure you know these. You want to make sure you know these terms because you don't want to be in a meeting and be like, well, what do you mean by sales conversion rate with an investor who's asking? You should know that, right? It's just as important as CAC.
Okay, so your innovation
Guy
KPIs.
over here asking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I got an accounting question for you. With the cost, it's very straightforward. Time you pay the money is when the cost is. But with revenue, I got a question. Let's say you have a sale of an order on April 20th, and they pay $1,500 down, and then they pay the other half of the order in the next month, $3,500 down. Do you count that, it's a $5,000 sale, they're paying 30% down 1 month, they pay the rest upon completion. Do you count that $5,000 sale in the month that it was made, or in the month that it was completed, or $1,500 in the first month and $3,500 in the second month?
You can do it both ways.
Yeah.
You can do it either way. Like, my preference is we count the money when that money actually hits the account.
Right.
Some people like to account for it, as soon as that contract is signed, and we might have gotten half, but, theoretically, that's the whole contract. We're gonna put it in there, and it will even itself out over the course of the year. However, if you are a startup and, you've got a fluctuation in your income and your costs are relatively fixed, that can be a tough way to do accounting, which is, why I prefer, when the money comes into the account, that's what I want to account for, right? John might have a slightly different take.
No, I treat it just like everything else. Nothing's real till the money hits the account, right? When that happens, and awesome, you could do the aging system where you're like, I signed all these contracts and you get to write the stuff off at the end of the year, potentially. But, my accountant has gotten mad at me for trying to do those things. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, we've
In a
been,
SaaS company, it's a lot more complicated because I believe your business is, you're selling something that they're buying a subscription.
Right.
And subscription, recognizing, revenue recognition of subscription SaaS businesses is a whole, we could probably have an hour on that. So I would suggest definitely get CPA, explain, how the business works, because you're technically supposed to recognize, split it up, recognize it probably monthly or something. It's not as straightforward as that. So I would definitely say professional.
Yeah, so you should reach out to a CPA. And then the other thing you should look at is like businesses and see how they're valuing themselves and how they're tracking things. Now, that's not accounting, that's valuation, that's different. And it depends on the SaaS business, on the valuation, and like what the multiplier will be, and that's a whole different conversation. But I don't do accounting, I have somebody with it.
yeah, I think the other aspect of it is, what we found out, and we've been through this before, is because you have a signed contract for X amount, and they pay, let's say, 20% down, 50% down, whatever you charge them, what if they don't pay what they owe you, right? The value of the contract is only good as the amount of money that comes in from the contract, right? We've been through that before. We got a third of the way through the contract, and the client said, yeah, we ran out of money. Or you can hold a piece of paper in front of them, like, yeah, but you owe. Okay, great. How are you gonna get the money? Right, they don't have any money to give you now, right? So that's also a problem. Again, not an accountant, but just telling my experiences and how I like to count cash coming in, right? Because we've had that happen. One time is too many. It's happened more than one time. So it's, and it can put a company in a tough spot, especially if you're startup.
The second part of this, product launch is success rate. There's an author, Jim Collins, I'm sure everybody's heard of Good to Great, Great by Choice. Read those books. That'll give you a lot of like what's a rifle shot, what's a cannonball, etc. All of that's really important to understand about taking measured risk versus taking complete risk. And then also completely missing the mark completely. So just make sure that you're figuring out like, all right, we want to launch this new product. I think it's going to do this. Will that work? Will that not work? And that will lead you to better decision-making as you progress.
Right, the time to market product launch success rate is something that your investors are going to want to see, or potential investors are going to want to see. We're talking, we're not talking tanning salons at this point. We're talking stuff that has a little more technological innovation attached to it, which today is most companies that are not retail. So if you say like, hey, look, I think that our product launch is 6 months and the update or product launch 2 is 12 months, and this is how it's going to go. And, that gets pushed back a month, 2, 3, 4, you're burning capital, right? You're burning investment, and that makes investors a little uncomfortable, especially if they don't see like a light at the end of the tunnel for that, right? I mean, there've been a number of companies that, their 6 month or 1 year product launch date was pushed to infinity and then went out of business, right? So, be aware that if you're going to say reasonably we can do this, that you have accounted for everything, and that you can actually do it relatively within that time frame.
So that leads to Yahoo, which everybody's heard of Yahoo, right? Does everybody know that they didn't do their own search from the beginning? Yeah? Anybody not know that? Okay, so Google did their search. So Google was hired to do their search. They did not own that, right? They were contracted to do that. When they were like, hey, we're going to increase our price, they were like, we'll find somebody else. And then they started using Bing and I can't remember the other one. They cycled between Bing and the other one. So they never actually focused on search. They were the #1 website for years. And they never focused on the one thing that made you #1, which is search. They weren't paying attention to how many people were using it to search for things. So they missed the mark. They also had the ability to buy Google for like $5 million. That was the offer to keep them on. It was ridiculous, right? Yahoo also had the opportunity to buy Facebook. Now they were trying to launch social. They had Yahoo Local. They were just so much to everybody. And they had an opportunity to buy Facebook for $1.6 billion, I think. Again, miss. Now, these metrics were more about Yahoo being unfocused and trying to do everything they possibly could, and then not focusing on individual things. Now, they'd already become a multi-billion-dollar company, and quite frankly, the only thing that could save them was their investment in Alibaba, which gave them, I think it was like a $20 billion lift. Because they were about to go like under. They were going to shrink down to like nothing. And allowed them to reinvest. And then they focused on the 3 things that they did really well, which was email. Yahoo Finance is probably one of the better products out of the market. And their ad placement. They had a very good ad engine. So another giant that is no longer a giant.
Yeah, they were like, look what they weren't tracking: user engagement, active users, time spent on site. Right? A lot of that is trending towards the social aspects of websites, which came up in the late 2000s. And forward-facing companies like Google tracked all of that. Yahoo decided to track none of that, right? So we see where Yahoo's at now. We see where Google's at now. I will admit, guiltily, that I actually still have a Yahoo email account because I've had it for like 20-some years. And I just can't get rid of it, even though I really don't use it for anything except spam stuff, right? But I just got the newest Yahoo email update today, and it looks surprisingly like Google 15 years later. So, really good stuff. Okay, smart KPIs. So when you are looking to put together KPIs in all the categories that we talked about, or the categories that make the most sense for your company, because every company is different. We use the acronym SMART, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, okay, what is your KPI for X? Well, I want to reach more users, right? That's a pretty weak KPI. Like, how would you measure that, right? So SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So if you can get your KPIs to conform to that, you can do a pretty good job of actually tracking stuff.
Sorry.
So specific and measurable. Don't leave any room for ambiguity. A weak example, instead of increased brand awareness, say I want to increase website traffic by 20% in Q3, right? So the idea here is you want, whenever you're dealing with KPIs, you want challenging but achievable, right? If you said, like, I want to increase my website traffic by 500% in Q3, probably not achievable, pretty challenging, right? The danger with some of this is, make sure that that they're not too achievable, right? Because at that point, it doesn't really help. I want to increase my web traffic by 1% in Q3. I mean, you can probably do that without actually doing a whole lot of anything, right? So that's kind of the key. Achievable and relevant, right? Provide better customer service than last year. Specifically, reduce average customer support resolution by 10%, right? First one's really weak, second one's really strong. Again, I don't know what kind of KPI you get out of the weak example, right? Provide better customer service. How are you going to track that? What are you going to track, right? Make it something that you can benchmark from, specific and measurable. Reduce X by X amount.
So like in a scenario like customer service, so I actually, one of the startups I was at, I had to run that, right? And we actually had a metric. We had to reduce customer, like them asking for help. It was like I think we were at like 9% of the sales called in for help or something like that. I can't remember the exact metric, but we had to reduce that down to 6. And we had like 6 months to do that. It actually wasn't that hard because it was really just about putting some information in on the final, like they purchase, and we just put some information in there. Because people would call, like, when's this coming? Oh, you're gonna get emailed the link that has the shipping information. There was no information saying that was gonna happen, like on the checkout. It was on the email that came later, which was usually around the pick, pack, and ship time, which was within 24 hours, but that simple problem actually dropped down the call in quite a bit. So sometimes it's easy, just the easy solution.
Time bound. You should create a sense of urgency. Make sure that your KPIs, we're talking about time bound, create accountability, right? If you say, hey, look, I want to achieve this in the next 6 months. All right, 6 months is a long time. People tend to be wired for short-term stuff, like here and now. Hey, in the next 30 days, the next 60 days, the next 90 days, 1 quarter, this is what I want to get done, right? When you put it in bite-sized chunks, there's greater accountability. When you extend it out past a quarter, there's less accountability. I mean, they're all data points, but those data points aren't doing you that much good if you kind of ignore them, because 6 months or a year is a long time, right? So you might have all the information, but it's not actually helping you, right? There's no accountability there.
And that translates to investment. So if you say, hey, in the next 3 months, I'm going to achieve this, and then 6 months following that, we'll hit this. Most angel investors will release in tranches. You guys heard me say that earlier. So they're not going to just write you a $3 million check for your startup. They might give you $1 million to start, and then they're going to release another $500,000, and then another $500,000, and they're going to do this as you hit your KPIs. Very common way of funding, because quite frankly, they don't know you. So they're going to keep getting their 10, 15% a year, and with their investments, with whoever their CFP is, or if they're doing it themselves, and they're going to release it as you hit the things that you guys agreed upon, because it holds you accountable and it holds them accountable, right? So just keep that in mind.
So we're going to put it together. This is just one example of the entire SMART thing into one KPI. Local baker wants to increase online orders. Their SMART KPI could be increase online orders by 15% in the next quarter by implementing a targeted social media advertising campaign offering 10% discount for first-time online users. If you do that, you can track all of that, right? You can track all of that. Then You can see where the weak points are if you're off, or, if you're way ahead, why are you way ahead? If you're right on, then, it means your process makes sense, right?
There you go. Go for it.
So, I was picturing the data flows, and, for example, the, bunch of software involved, and software components. How does it work? Let's say when somebody, wants you guys or your service, from start to finish, and okay, let's do the market research for you, and then, find out the ROI. So obviously there's going to be different components involved, right? Market research, maybe the pre-phase, or when they might not even have like the CRM or something. And then the lead to cash process will be happening using the CRM. What is going to be the mechanism? Does it need data extraction from the CRM, or is Project Wilbur, this software is going to integrate with the CRM? How is it going to work with the different components of software?
So like Project Wilbur as a software platform, is that what you're thinking? So we're not a software platform.
Oh.
Yeah. So this, we're consultants, we work with investors. I thought I was clear, my bad. So we're consultants, we also have a software development shop, and then we also do some marketing. Right? We work with investors to vet their investments into different startups, and we get called when those investments go sideways, and we'll fix them, right? So we collectively have 4 decades plus worth of experience in the startup space, lots of exits. We know what works, what doesn't work, and all that good stuff. So we're not a platform. We have some platforms that we built that are ours internally, but this isn't one of them.
Yeah, still, you use something, right? What do you use?
We use for CRM, we use Zoho. For project management, we use Zoho because it's easier to just do that. Email is Send in Blue, Gmail, Google Suite.
So for the analysis, you
So to get data, we have PitchBook,
yes.
Crunchbase. What was the other one that we had for a while? Paid for, it was like $3,000 a year. I don't remember what it was.
It was for industry research.
Yeah, there's a couple of industry research sites that we use to pull data, but we're doing different sort of data. So we're analyzing your company. So when you guys come to us, we're figuring out what are the comps in this space? How much are you worth? What is this actually, is this investable? We do background checks. We use lots of different platforms to figure out the background checks. Well, we have an agency that we use to make sure that, not that we should give everything away, but we do what's your record? Have you ever been arrested? Why were you arrested? All those things. That breaks down a due diligence research packet that we give to the investor.
So can I just rephrase your question? Maybe I think this is what you're looking at. There's all these metrics here for different, it looks like from different systems. What data systems do the startups actually need to have to make to be able to put that all together? I think that's kind of the question.
Yeah. So you could just use the Excel spreadsheet. You just need to capture data points. So the more data you can capture, the better. So for you, so you would want to use a CRM. There's lots of them that are free, right? Pick one of those because startups and budgets, right? You want to use QuickBooks or something to keep track of your books because you need to have a P&L and a balance sheet when you go to raise. Even if you're negative, it doesn't matter. You just want to be able to say, hey, we have clean books. It's not just napkin drawing. Also, you just don't want to have that conversation. You want to be able to have a clean cap table. Again, that can be Excel. There's lots of free versions of cap table management as well. So those are some high-level things. I would recommend if you're an e-commerce platform using stuff like Hotjar, and you've got a Google Analytics plugin there, and you've got a Meta plugin so you can capture what's working, what's not. What else am I missing?
Yeah, I think pretty much everything that John mentioned and many more, you can download the data into an Excel file or Google Sheet. or a CSV, right? Which is important. I think if you want to get a little more advanced, like Airtable is a common one because there's a lot of plugins with that. There's a lot of things that you can do and organize the data in really interesting ways. If it's end up being really, really big data sets, which Excel, even with pivot tables, can be tough to organize sometimes if you got a ton of data running through your site. But I would say whenever you're putting platforms together, like we chose Zoho because those two platforms, our CRM and our project management, talk to each other. And then everything else that we have, we make sure that they integrate with pretty seamlessly. So my advice is, there's a lot out there, pick the one that's right for you. But whenever you're, putting different systems together, if they're different systems, make sure they integrate and make sure they don't do overlapping jobs. Because they'll be spitting out duplicate data in different formats, and it just creates a lot of noise.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly what I was thinking, that would be how these different softwares and components, and then of course data coming out of everywhere. How is it going to be, how you guys will extract it or organize it? So, yeah, so if it's not in the software that's going to integrate with those, then that's
Yeah, I think mostly, most of our stuff, you can checkbox what kind of data you want, and that helps cut down on the noise. So, I always try and get as few columns as possible and go from there. But yeah, but that goes back to knowing what's important and what's not, like what data is important and what's not, right? And it's going to vary by company.
Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah.
You also want to collect that data because you're not going to know what's important and what's not either. So having systems that can collect a lot more of the underground, underlying relationships and segments are going to be crucial too. So keep that in mind, because a lot of what I love your presentation, but there's a lot of information that if you could dig down deeper can give you an idea of why things are not happening.
Totally, and when you're gathering things like, how long they're on your website, and you dive into like what pages they're clicking on, which ones they're not, what they're focused on, what they are focused on, what they're not focused on. That we didn't cover any of that, right? User data is something that's really important. Also, referral data, like that falls into your customer acquisition costs and all of that. Like, there's a bunch of different like granular segments into each one of those, but if you don't know the high level ones, most investors will be like, hey, thanks for coming in, right? And that's just the way it is. It's just really simple. So
I see your significance of your work also. So I worked as a Salesforce architect. So I have done like integration starting from lead to cash, for example. So lead would be an example of that system to market, for example.
Yeah.
So we are collecting leads in market, and then they are coming from various sources such as LinkedIn Navigator or Tech Target or those from who they are. So leads are getting ingested there, then lead goes through its life cycle before making its way into Salesforce, and then Salesforce has its own, of course, opportunity life cycle or deal from lead to capture the whole, and then there's a code part also. And then sometimes it goes into NetSuite after the order is created, and NetSuite is doing its own thing. So as the lady was mentioning, that there are so much of data coming out from so many different systems, right? So, and I can see that as an architect. If my boss asks me what's working and what's not working, I may become biased and give them the wrong answer. But somebody like you will have an unbiased view of which part is actually working and which part is not working.
right. It comes down to like, you're talking about a funnel map system where you're actually figuring out where each piece is going. Yes, you're right. You want to have as much data. You might not know what's working because you might be missing data collection on one or two different segments that are important because it wasn't set up to capture that, right? Which is why capturing as much as possible is important. But the ones that really matter, like an investor invests on, or you can raise capital on, or you can get a loan from, right, are as simple as the ones we covered. The more granular you get is for you internally to grow your business, right? For you internally to capture like, little Tommy is now stealing paper from the copy room. Like all of that is relevant based on internal metrics, right? So that's not outward facing. Make sense? Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know, this might be a generic question, but what categories of data have you seen is most tied to human behavior?
Pretty broad question.
Yeah, it's really broad. Do you have somewhere you're going with that? Because I need a little more help. Because pretty much everything's tied to human behavior. Yeah.
Are you talking from a customer point of view or from a business team point of view?
Yeah, so from a business point of view, and seeing where they can mostly hone their resources to. I'm trying to, it's a very generic question, so I'm trying to figure out how to.
So basically, the business team understanding kind of, knowing what questions to ask, how to use that data, kind of more of the data culture aspect.
Yeah, just finding that piece of data where they can see, there's an actual human behavior that can track with the data and focus their resources
Well,
One example.
Go ahead.
Like, so I was just talking about Margero, so I remember this project I was working on, they had like, the Google AdWords, for example, like, okay, what do we search with, or it can also be what we click on, right? The click can generate a lead. So
Sure.
That's one example of human behavior, I guess.
So, are you asking based on different data sets that you can maybe predict human behavior? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like some categories, like
Yeah.
maybe that you see that mostly is.
So you can predict sales cycles based on data, right? Like you can predict that gym memberships are going to go up in the Q1 of every year because everybody sets those guidelines, right? You can predict in Q4 that retail sales will go through the roof because that's just standard and that's the holiday season and people get gifts, right? What you can't predict are outliers. Like Pokemon Go was an outlier. Nobody could predict that it would like basically turn an augmented reality space, which was estimated to be, I think at the time, like $300 million that year, as far as the AR market was going to be, and Pokemon Go by itself was like 900 million, right? So the rest of the market was 300. Pokemon Go created an outlier, right? It's hard to predict certain things that are outliers, but other things you can, right? One of the things with the data that you're capturing, being able to predict the sales cycle allows you to have those KPIs that are addressable, right? So like if you're fundraising, right? And you know, like let's say you're selling to schools, and you know the sales cycle's 18 months, right? And you know they only buy basically from June until September, right? Hypothetically. And you know, depending on when you start, how long it's going to be until you start getting sales. Now you can start filling the pipe, you start building relationships, but you're going to be maybe not making money for 24 months, right? So there's data points that you can glean from market data that allows you to then make predictions, right? Does that help? Did I answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that helps.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody else? All right, well, thanks. Yes.
KPIs and snort KPIs and be honest about them for you. That all sounds like, I want to know how to raise $2 billion like quick games.
Dude, seriously. No, so I actually don't know the story about them, but I will tell you, an exited founder or having exited founders on your team will speed up your fundraise exponentially, and revenue will speed. We have a startup we're working with right now. They have $9 million in trailing 12 months in sales. They've raised no money. They have 30 plus patents. They have a solution that only the Fortune 200 companies are going to want to buy. But they're going to want to buy it at like $100 to $400 million a year in commitments. right? That's a company that's worth investing in. And it's an exited founder. It's actually a series of exited founders, and 2 of the exits were in the billions. So, and they haven't raised any money. So this is a scenario where you could actually go and do like an uncapped safe scenario and raise a bunch of money. It would be ridiculous. Luckily, I'm friends with the guy, so that works out. But my point is, that's like you stack the deck in your favor. In your pitch, in your company, you want to make sure that you have the best people that add value, not just your best friend who you trust with your kids, which is also a benefit. It does happen.
I think Quibi's co-founders were Meg Whitman and Tom Ackerman, like multiple exits, right? But,
Right.
yeah.
Everybody around.
Right.
What's that word? It's actually this.
Well, it's like if I've heard this, like, why can't I raise money like Jack Dorsey, right? Because you're not Jack Dorsey, right? Like, I mean, the guy's like just
Can't even grow beer.
right. I could do that, but it's like all different colors. It's like crazy. Anyway, go ahead.
I mean, the other thing too is we're also seeing the survivorship bias too. So those people who happen to be making all that money, I mean, yes, they obviously had something very substantial, but they're also the ones who survived from really long, like, lead generation. You can almost say a lead generation, right? So I think that's where you're saying when, you know, having the founders around and being able to get over a lot of the humps is really key. And the other thing too is people struggle with metrics and, you know, and finding the right metrics. Like the example on Google, I've seen that happen so many times with really mature companies. And you're like, but we need to be measuring this. And they're like, no, but this is what we're measuring. This is what's so important, but you're not seeing this. And it's getting the right metrics and really understanding them is a real art that you have to hone over time.
Right.
And I know I made a joke about it, but she's correct. This stuff is very good.
No, it's both of you are totally correct. And your joke was, you know, got me into the Jack Dorsey conversation. So, awesome. Well, like anybody else, feel free to come chat. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so of course KPIs are super important when it comes to evaluating talent within your company. And so my question is, how important is it? Because obviously there's other factors like culture fit, how much you time to your long-term vision. But how important are KPIs from their point in order to determine whether or not you should keep them for the long term, I guess? So is it like an 80-20 thing, or is it like it's only about the KPIs, or do other things matter more?
Depends on what you're talking about. So like you mentioned culture matters for long-term growth, hiring the right people, things like that. KPIs like ROI, growth, and all the things that I was mentioning around investment matters around those things. Team, depending on the stage, matters probably more than anything. I mean, like, break it down for you simply. I mean, if you're grading things on a scale, 60% in pre-seed and seed, 60% of the vote for the VCs or the investors, 60% of that vote is not the problem or solution, it's the team, right? And sometimes 10, sometimes 20, or sometimes 30% of that 60 is just the CEO, right? So it depends on who it is. Like Dreesen has their own metric, Greylock has their own, I have my own. Everybody has their own system, right? But it's good to know, it depends, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for startups, I just wanted to address something that was said over here, and it was a good joke, by the way. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and like I'm a data nerd, and I'm a stickler for, you know, coming up, you know, if you can't prove it through data, or at least strongly infer it, then it doesn't count. So like the typical startup thing is like, we don't need data, let's just start building stuff, right? That's like, you know, I'm more of a measure twice or 4 times and cut once kind of guy. And the opposite way, which a lot of startups do, it is the measure 0 times, cut 50 times, and end up with no usable wood, right? So what I try and do is use data to I start with customer profiles, right? Build the ideal customer, find out how many of them are in a given geographic area, go from there. You know, I'm not a fan of TAM Samsung because again, it says market, but it's really industry. It doesn't tell you anything about customers, right? And a lot of people always say, well, my customer, figure out my customer is I go talk to 100 people. And my response is always, well, look, if you haven't figured out your customer attributes and built like the ideal customer persona, how good is the data you get from talking to 100 people? What if 12 of them are your customer and 88 are not? If you got junk data and if 12 of them are your customer, how would you know which 12, right? So to me, I wanna build things out before I start as much as possible so I can start testing that data, those data sets, and moving forward instead of just moving forward and then you're always like pivot. I'm like, how do you know what you're pivoting to? Because how do you know where you started from? And, you're going in circles, right? You have to baseline. So I'm big on creating data sets. And like I said, there's no data set. You can't Google like, hey, can I get a data set, there's no custom data set for, pizza parlors in a 10-mile radius that serve, margarita pizza and this and to do that. Like, that's custom stuff you got to figure out on your own. So sometimes you have to get creative by looking at different data sets and combining or reorganizing on your own. Yes.
Can I just elaborate
Yeah,
on what you
please.
just said? This is how I think about it. You always have to think about it's not really being data driven, it's really being question driven. And the questions you ask, the data will answer the questions. So it's another way of doing the scientific method of, okay, I have this product, and is it going to fit into this market? Do I have data about that market? Am I making progress in that market? Those are the questions that you want to ask, and then you go make sure, one, you have to ask, do I have that data to be able to answer that question? If I do, great, does it tell me? If I don't have that data, then I need to go and get that data to be able to answer that question. And that's what it really means to be data driven. It's not really data driven, it's question driven and using metrics to be able to say, am I moving the needle? Does that help clarify?
That's good. I like that.
So another question, since you guys are the data geniuses, were you able to predict the election?
Didn't say I was a data genius, I said I was a data nerd.
That's in a whole different category.
Yeah. I'm gonna decline to answer that.
I also declined.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks, everybody.
Yeah, that was good.
Hi everyone, just another quick announcement. We have another event on December 3rd. It's going to be for Rise Up. It'll be at WeWork in downtown Summerlin area. That one is going to be in the afternoon. I believe it's on a Tuesday. Yeah, Women in Tech about mentorship. It'll be super fun. Enjoy and join us in that one as well, December 3rd. But just keep in mind it's going to be at the one in Summerlin, WeWork, not this location. It'll be in the afternoon around 12:30 to 1:30.
Yeah, this particular question.
Yeah, very positive.
The new rule that it is. Well, that's the other thing. I sort of myself. The other person, and I do this more later. There's always been a question and an argument.
Yes.
Bye. See ya.
I see you.
Fernando. Hey, can we talk before you take off? Hey, like, Ron. So I'm sort of impressed last Friday and I made a whole new thing. And that's what this. You
guys need to get signed.
The keys are really. One, two, one, we're still at.
Recognize revenue.